quiet it down so quickly. This is great. I think, and I know Rick is here somewhere. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time to come and listen and learn and talk and give your input. Really looking at what we as a county, not just county government, what we as a county can do to address the addictions crisis that's happening certainly all over, but we're feeling the effects and we're seeing people die and we're seeing what's happening here. So how do we as a county community come together? And so before we introduce the panelists, what I'd like to do is invite our chair of our commission, Tootie Smith, to come and say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Board of County Commissioners, we welcome you to our very first Clackamas Addictions Recovery Summit, CARS for short. So if you can't think of the big name, think of cars. We all drive one, right? Okay. First of all, our esteemed panelists for joining us this week, thank you, thank you, thank you. Our 2-hour session yesterday was just nothing short but remarkable. We had a very informative meeting, and we can't wait for everyone else in the room to hear about that. For the stakeholders in the room, thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to join us today for this summit. Your input during the breakout sessions later will be greatly appreciated, and please don't be afraid to talk. You all have a point of view, you all have life experiences that can help us in that, or add support to what you think is important as you hear today. How did we get here? This summit was inspired by a conversation during our Board of County Commissioners retreat earlier this year. And we decided that it's time to do something different, to look at the crisis differently than what has already been done in the state of Oregon. We no longer need to look in the mirror and copy the same procedures, the same money allocations that's been done before, and we can only look to our neighbors to the north to see what they're doing is not working. It's going to take strong leaders to speak out against the status quo. And you will hear today some very different approaches, and it will take strong leadership to buck the current system of addiction recovery, to get our state turned around and to get our county turned around and poise Clackamas County as a leader in addiction recovery. We recognize there are brilliant ideas all over the room. While we prepared for this summit, we adopted a resolution supporting a recovery-oriented system of care in responding to the addictions, mental health, and homeless crisis that is gripping almost every county in this state. In the resolution, we proclaimed, Clackamas County believes in the dignity and worth of its residents. All residents, by the way, those who just are not addicted, but those residents who show up for work every day and pay the taxes so we can be in this room today, they deserve the same dignity. Don't ever forget that. And the communal good that is achieved when residents are on a path toward the realization of their full potential. I thank you all for being here today and to help us and our residents become self-sufficient and earn back the dignity and self-worth. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our facilitator, our very able Cindy Becker.
So just a couple of housekeeping things. There's coffee and water and healthy snacks in the room over there if anybody has the inclination. Also, if restrooms, if you go out the doors and make a left and around the stairwells, there's the men and women's restroom. And we will have a break at about 10:15, 10:30, and so you're free to get up and stretch and do whatever you need to do. So putting this together was, as the chair said, this really was at the initiative of the board, and we are just very thankful and pleased that this great panel has been able to come together. We've got folks from Texas, California, Clackamas County and from Canada. And so it's a really great panel. They have incredible expertise and experiences, and we really want this to be a conversation. So while initially you're going to hear presentations from the panel, there's not going to be any PowerPoints, don't worry about that. But after they have a chance to talk about their experiences with recovery-oriented systems of care, we're going to turn it back to you. We really want these conversations to happen at the local level. We've got lots of different perspectives here. We've got mayors, we have EMS, we have law enforcement, we have peers, we have providers, we have business folks. We've got a great mix of people to start this conversation. And again, I hope this will just be the start of the conversation, and we will continue this in the coming weeks and months ahead. Putting something like this together is never a one-person gig, and I want to do a shout-out to Kimberly DeSantis from County Administration, who has really just been incredible by doing all the logistics and putting all this stuff together. So thanks a lot, Kimberly. We want this to be interactive, and so if you have burning questions of the panel as they are talking, feel free to ask them. Also, the panelists will be at each of the tables, so you'll be able to kind of get down and dirty on some of the things that you may not want to ask in front of the whole group, but you'll be comfortable asking at your table. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panelists. By the way, I hope you all got a copy of the agenda, and there is a description of the panelists' experience on back. And so on my far, your right, my right is Sheldon Bailey from Canada. And then we have Jennifer Worth from the Grand Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, right? And Tom Wolf from California. We have Anna Rauch from Texas. We have Andy Mendenhall right in our own backyard in Clackamas, Portlandish kind of area, right?
And late.
Right.
My apologies.
That's fine. And Rick Armstrong from Canada, and Robert Marbut from Canada as well. And I'm going to start off, we're just going to start off the conversation, and we're going to go from here. This is really intended to be a fluid meeting, and so if we end early in this part, we'll go to the work groups, to the tabletops. We also are going to have scribes at the tabletops, so as you come up with questions, as you come up with burning platform issues, what are your pain points? That's one of the things we really want to know. What are the things that you see as barriers from your lens? And we're going to talk about potential solutions. After this meeting, this is the third of 3 meetings, by the way, we're going to get together with the panelists, and we're going to, talk about what they heard from you, what they see, and making some recommendations. Is there some low-hanging fruit, short-term, long-term? We don't want to use this valuable time and your input to come up with some 25-page document that's going to sit on somebody's wall. This is really intended to be an action-oriented event. And so we take very seriously what we're hearing here, and we want to turn this into action. So again, thank you very much for coming. And we've asked the panelists to talk about a few things. One is, what is their experience with a recovery-oriented system of care? What are best practices? What have they learned? What have quote-unquote mistakes been made by other organizations that we can learn from, and we don't want to make those? What are some nuggets of information? What are some really 3 important things? One of the things that I've talked about early on was that we want to leave these meetings with a shared understanding of what a recovery-oriented system of care is. You may not agree with it, but we at least would have a shared understanding of that. And I'm going to steal from one of our panelists who says, that's not enough, Cindy. You have to have shared goals. You have to say, what does success look like? And have everybody come together and talk about what success looks like. Because if you don't have that and you're just talking about pain points, you're going to end up in lots of different directions. So thank you, Robert, for letting me steal that from you. And he's going to talk about it more. He's much more eloquent, but I thought that was a really important point. And Rick Armstrong started our panelists the other day and then ended them, and he asked me to put him in the middle. So I'm going to do that. And I'd like to start off with Tom Wolf, who's going to talk with us about his experiences and things that they've also been touring the area, so have some understanding of kind of what's going on, at least from an outdoor perspective. The other thing, if you haven't seen it yet, this just came out. Oregon recovers an emergency 12-step, I don't know why they came up with 12, but anyway, 12-step plan to end Oregon's addiction crisis. And so they're presenting this to the Oregon legislature. If you get a chance to see it, I think you're going to resonate with some of the things we're saying here, but these guys say it a lot better. Anyway, so I'm just going to turn it over and start with Tom.
Great. Well, good morning. Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everyone. So as you see on the bio, my name's Tom Wolf. I'm formerly homeless in recovery from San Francisco. So I'm from a city that's experiencing many of the same problems that Portland is experiencing. In fact, you could argue that San Francisco is kind of the epicenter of the opioid crisis in the United States. We're probably second only to Vancouver in all of North America with what we're facing with homelessness. The city that I come from has somewhere between 8,000 and 20,000 people experiencing homelessness right now. Based on my experience and certain other studies show that the amount of people struggling with addiction out there ranges somewhere between 47 and 80%, depending on who you talk to, what data you look at, and the data varies, right? And I think that's because the homeless population varies and it's transient and it fluctuates. And the city that I come from, for every one person that we get off the street, 4 people are entering homelessness. So this is a crisis that we need to get in front of very, very quickly. And what I will say is that once whether addiction played a part in you becoming homeless or you turn to drugs to self-medicate because of the trauma of being homeless, the end result is the same. You have thousands of people on the street right now struggling with various states of substance use disorder. And what incentives can we create that are outside the traditional methods that we used to utilize to actually entice or encourage or incentivize people to access drug treatment? Well, the biggest thing that's missing there is infrastructure. So, for example, our previous infrastructure across the United States for the last 20, 30 years, maybe 50 years, was the criminal justice system. We have all pretty much collectively decided that while we want law enforcement to be a partner, we don't want to have jail be the housing place for people that are struggling with addiction and homelessness, because that's not necessarily conducive to recovery, right? That makes sense, right? And so we changed all these laws to make that less likely to happen. But what we didn't do is we didn't build any infrastructure to replace it. And that's why we're looking at tent encampments all over the 205 now, and people just camped out using fentanyl, why we're seeing 2 deaths a day in San Francisco from drug overdose. Same with Portland, 2 overdoses a month in Clackamas. This year right now in San Francisco, my city, we're looking at 700 to 800 overdose deaths before the year is over, just in a city of 800,000 people. And ironically, 70% of all those overdose deaths are happening at a fixed address, unfortunately, most of them inside permanent supportive housing, which speaks to the need, or speaks to the fact that there is a lack of infrastructure to support people that are struggling with substance use disorder and untreated mental illness, which is kind of why we're here today. We're here to talk about ways that we can be creative in implementing a recovery system of care, which starts with basic stabilization and moves into a treatment on demand system. And then the biggest place where it's always lacking anywhere you go in the country around drug treatment is what happens to people after they complete drug treatment. 90 days of treatment, and then what? You just go back to the same old situation. You go back to homelessness. There's no transitional housing for folks. There's not enough permanent supportive housing for folks. And so the waiting room for that supposed housing that's going to get scaled up at some point, eventually maybe, is the street. And that's what we're seeing now. And while you're on the street, what do? You self-medicate. I did when I was on the street. Why wouldn't you? You're living in a tent with no job, no hope. People ignore you, or they look down on you. You face that stigma every day of being on the street. Why wouldn't you self-medicate? And the fentanyl pill that you want to use is only $1.50 right now. Why wouldn't you do it? That's what we have to figure out. And so we need to figure out a way to create that infrastructure. And so I believe, and what I've helped implement in San Francisco through the Salvation Army in San Francisco, which I've got them to pivot their entire model to kind of move into the 21st century, away from the old school abstinence-based treatment into a treatment on demand system where they have a detox that accepts medically assisted treatment, moves into residential treatment that accepts medically assisted treatment. And if you complete the 6 months of residential treatment, you're guaranteed up to 18 months of transitional housing. as a way to extend your recovery, right? We started a pilot program with 90 beds. Just this year, it's already full, and there's already a wait list for it. So the demand is out there. So when people tell you that people on the street don't want to get off drugs, that's a lie. Of course they do. They're just afraid. So we have to give them hope and show them the way, and that's what we're here for today, and I hope we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next person that I would like to have say a few words is Andy, who is the CEO, President, Grand Czar of Central City Concern. By the way, I just want to let everybody know that this meeting is streaming live, so don't say anything that you don't want to hear your neighbors talk about in case they're tuning this in on YouTube. But anyway, we're really excited. And the other thing, we were very intentional about who we invited to this meeting. We didn't want to open it up to the world because we didn't want to have a mass of people come and not be able to have some good, hard conversations. So you're invited here because of what you do and because you have a vested interest and because you're part of the solution. So again, we do appreciate you coming here, and we do hope that other folks will be watching this because it is really important. And it's not that they're not important, but we wanted to have the group small enough so we could have some good conversations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, Cindy. And good morning and welcome, everyone. Again, thank you to all the panelists. Brief apology for my being a couple minutes late. It was an early start downtown this morning. I am honored to serve as the president and CEO of Central City Concern. And Central City Concern operates one form of a part of a broader recovery-oriented system of care. We're honored to serve about 14,000 folks in the metro region annually. We serve folks that are insured by Medicaid who are at or below 200% of federal poverty level. Large federally qualified health center system, large housing continuum of care, all different types of housing, everything from low barrier transitional to permanent supportive housing. About 2,600 units. Our housing continuum of care serves 4,800 people annually. We also help people get back to work and get jobs. We have an employment division that this year will serve more than 2,000 individuals. Our golden thread is a pathway from houselessness to medical withdrawal management, detoxification, to being housed and receiving primary care, outpatient intensive addiction services and treatment, behavioral health care as needed, and then over a period of 6 to 9 months, folks graduate from their programming and work to go back, get engaged and go back to work. We're really proud our organization's been around for 43 years. What I can tell you is that our organization's outcomes have been struggling for the last couple years. Pandemic impact, new drugs, and an inadequate, insufficiently resourced for more than the last 2 decades behavioral health system of care. As a board-certified addiction medicine specialist and family physician for the last 20 years, I will tell you that the SAMHSA definition, when I digested about what a recovery-oriented system of care is that it is a substance use disorder and behavioral health system of care that meets the service needs, the treatment needs, and the social determinants of health needs of each individual that's being served in a coordinated and connected way. Folks need to channel Tom's thoughts, the right service at the right time for the right duration, we might even say the right dosage, with accountability and follow-up for both the clients and the service providers. Where we're at in Oregon right now is, and in particular in the metropolitan region, is the result of more than 20 years, the entire duration that I've been out of training, of under-resourcing and underfunding our behavioral health system of care, both for substance use disorders and also for severe mental illness. We also haven't been building enough affordable housing, not only for folks that are less fortunate, but also for workforce, right? Many of the people that work for us struggle and work in this part of the service sector struggle to afford to live in the communities in which they serve. During the pandemic crisis, we've seen acuity go through the roof. Fentanyl, more potent, more cheap, and more accessible methamphetamine than ever before. And what we see on our streets and in our community is an unmet level of care need. Folks that have a much higher level of acuity need the infrastructure that Tom was referring to, need resource access, not in 3 weeks, but tonight, when community or law enforcement need folks, don't want to incarcerate or jail folks, need folks to be able to get the services that they need. Wrapped around all this, we need a data framework to be able to tell the story. So what can we learn? And I'll conclude here very briefly. We need folks to be able to get the right treatment at the right time for the right duration. And we need significant infrastructure needs in the psychiatric hospitalization and in particular the residential treatment levels of care. And we're where we are because of more than 2 decades of underfunding. We also need to use readily available data. We need to use data that predominantly is derived from Medicaid claims data. Every person who pays taxes is paying to support the Medicaid and Medicare system. And what we are doing right now with respect to folks that are living outside and folks who are struggling with untreated behavioral health conditions is we are paying for the complications. We're paying hundreds of millions of dollars for the complications of untreated behavioral health conditions. That story can and will be told through claims analysis that CCC is proud to be partnering with our coordinated care organization partners in Care Oregon to understand where are we benchmarking and how do we then drive change to both bend the spend curve, but more importantly, drive outcomes for our community members who are suffering. Last but not least, I encourage us all and commend the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners for convening this Blue Ribbon panel, because we're at a time where we need to build system ads that meet population needs and not simply take an incremental approach that we've done for the last 20 years to create small scaled additions, because that's not going to get the population that we're all talking about here the resources and services that they need, which will, if we're successful, transform the face of our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. One of the things that you're going to hear throughout this is really the conversation about systems, because what's happened over the past, well, more than several decades, is funding streams have dictated what you can provide when. And so they don't really look at it from a systems perspective, but we've got pop-ups. Okay, well, the service of the year is, okay, peer-operated respite. Okay, let's do a couple of residential beds, and let's do this. And there's no connection. There's constantly money being thrown at things, and what you're going to hear from this group is the importance of having that system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am from Houston, Texas, and I work for the Coalition for the Homeless, and we are the lead agency for more than 100 service providers in 3 counties, Harris, Fort Bend, and Montgomery. Back in 2012, Houston had the 6th highest homeless population in the nation, and we were identified as a priority community by HUD. That was not a good thing. That meant that our recidivism rates, returns to homelessness, was very, very poor. Our outcomes from permanent housing, both permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, was very, very poor. And our providers were not talking to one another. They were siloed. And we were returning millions of dollars to HUD every year because they were not being spent. And so that led to a community charrette over a 3-day period. We did get some technical assistance to help this. And it brought all of the partners together. It brought adjacent systems. It brought funders into the collaborative model that we use to this day. It effectively put the Coalition for the Homeless as the official lead agency to guide this work. And the 5-year strategic plan that came out of that was to create about 2,500 units of permanent supportive housing, because we had a lot of individuals experiencing chronic homelessness on the streets, a lot of very vulnerable folks. And so in 5 years, we were able to actually create 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing, and more than half our homeless numbers, by 54%. We do use the Housing First model. I will say that I've heard a lot of different people speak, both on the panel and in the audience, and I understand that not everybody is a fan of Housing First. But I want to be very specific that we learned very, very early on that housing first is not housing only. It has to be housing first with supportive services. There's no housing first without supportive services. So when Housing First is implemented incorrectly is when you have people dying in permanent supportive housing. We had 90 people die in permanent supportive housing last year, and it was not because of drug overdoses. It's 1% of the number of individuals in our housing programs. Granted, Houston is very different, but what we have done can be replicated just using some different approaches, and of course the laws, a lot of things are different. We still have a lot of market apartments in Houston where people can, we can scatter site our units. Permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, it involves three things. It involves the actual physical unit, supportive services, and of course the rental subsidy. Not everybody needs permanent supportive housing, but the reality is that there are going to be people out there that are never going to be able to live independently. So what are you going to do with those individuals? Houston is a revenue capped city. We do not get funding from the county or the city for homelessness or the state. The bulk of the money that we get is directly from the federal government, from HUD. And so we have to be very specific and choosy on what we can put into those funds into. And so we have put the bulk of that, I would say about 95%, into permanent housing. We don't fund a lot of temporary measures. That is what the community, the collaborative model that I described along with our steering committee, has made the decision over many years now, 10 years, to continue to do this, because when you look at the cost of funding like a facility, it's just for $30 million a year, we can house 6,000 people in Houston. So it just doesn't make sense for us to pay for a facility or a location, but understanding that there is a place for that in some locations. We do not have the fentanyl issue in Houston like there is here in California. There are other drugs of choice, but we do have people that OD and die on the streets. But every individual is different when it comes to their housing path. There are people that are unsheltered, that maybe we're gonna house them and then provide the supportive services around them. We're gonna provide mental health, substance use, whatever is required. We're not a Medicaid expansion state, so we don't get Medicaid dollars to pay for that. We have to be very creative. We've become experts on braiding funding. We have to pick and choose and put things together to figure out how we're gonna best meet the needs of our individuals. Since that 2012 date that I mentioned, we've decreased homelessness by 61%. We've housed 30,000 individuals. We've decommissioned 113 encampments with about 700 individuals in those encampments. Our PSH outcomes are 95% right now. Our rapid rehousing outcomes are 80%. So it's not perfect. The individuals that we house from encampments are very, very challenging. We have to work with them. We don't close an encampment unless we have a place to put them. This year we opened a navigation center for the first time because we're starting to feel the crunch of the housing market. We've housed so many people, especially in one bedrooms, that at one point we were very short on one bedroom apartments in Houston. We do have, I would say 50-50 of our housing is site-based and then scattered site. We keep about 8 to 9, I would say close to 9,000 individuals housed on a nightly basis. And so for the individuals from an encampment, maybe someone needs mental health support and not substance use, or maybe someone needs just substance use, or maybe someone just needs to find a job. Maybe it's a family with children that can't take 3 months out for treatment. And so we have to work around the needs of each individual. It's tailored specifically, and that is what Housing First is intended to be. The individuals that we're housing from encampments, when we don't have, if their unit is not available, they go directly into the navigation center. The navigation center is costing about $3 million to operate right now. And I'm not gonna lie, it's hard to find the funding for it. We have about a year, and then we have to kind of be creative again. It's about 100 beds, but it's not an emergency shelter. It is for individuals that have a housing placement already. So they have a housing referral, they're waiting on the unit, or they're waiting on something to be ready so that they can then exit out of the navigation center. It will be also used as a disaster overflow shelter because, of course, we have a lot of natural disasters in Houston, unfortunately. And so that was one of the intent that the general support of the city. When we were restructuring on that collaborative model back in 2012, we did have a lot of political will. Our mayor at the time, Anise Parker, homelessness was very important to her. And so she created a position in her cabinet to help address homelessness, and then Sylvester Turner kept that position. and it has kept up that mission of addressing homelessness. And so we've had a lot of great support. Also, the judges, both Judge Emmett and, of course, Lena Hidalgo now, have been very, very generous. The pandemic funding that came in was really a once-in-a-lifetime transformation opportunity of our system. It helped us to decrease our unsheltered homeless numbers by 17% in the last year. So that is, where a lot of cities were seeing an increase in unsheltered homelessness, we have really just tackled it in a holistic approach. We have mental health partners that are with us on the ground, substance use partners that are with us to try to do this holistically. And of course, at the end of the day, it means that, you have to treat every person as an individual. You have to work with their needs and not try to just put a blanket policy across all of them. Here to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I think this is right in the middle, Rick. So I think we're good. And so Rick has been involved in lots of different programs and services and developing them from the ground up. And so he's going to talk about his experiences. He also has some very specific work with peers. And so we'd just like you to talk about what you know and what you've learned.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It is an honor to sit here. I feel like I'm the least qualified amongst the panelists, but here I am anyway. Ironically, I'm looking at the date. 7 years ago today, a series of events started that ultimately, within 48 hours, led me to a suicide attempt. And ultimately, that became my sobriety date. So I've been clean. Fingers crossed, as long as I make it 2 more days, 7 years in 2 days. Going into that situation, I think the optics of addiction and substance use disorders, very much it's a them problem. We see the homeless, we see the destitute, we see them, and that's a them problem. It's not an us problem. It's not my family, it's not my friends, it's those people. I didn't realize that I was those people. I didn't seek out any kind of support. I didn't identify as a drug addict. I didn't identify as an alcoholic. And keep in mind, I was in a bar by 8:30 every morning, and then doing some coke mid-afternoon to kind of sober myself back up, and then drink some more. And this was my life for years. Despite that, I was successful. I owned several companies. I owned a nice house. I went on holidays with my family. So I wasn't those people. So it was very hard for me. There was no reason for me to seek any kind of treatment or support or programming, because in my mind, I didn't have a problem. Until I did. Ultimately, it's exhausting. It's exhausting living that. I was actually presenting to a panelist or a team from Family and Child Services up in Canada, and I remember specifically the director looking at me going, it must be so hard to stay sober and stay clean. I said, no, are you crazy? It's easy. Living that lifestyle, that was hard. That was exhausting. That was crazy. This is so much better. And so my turning point was meeting a gentleman who came in and told me his story. That was it. He didn't ask me a thing. I'm laying in a bed in a psych ward. He didn't ask me anything about me. Wasn't a doctor, wasn't a specialist. And he sat down and told me his story. And he was a father. He had some kids. Successful. I'm from Alberta, so we're kind of oil country. He was successful, again, much like myself in all measures of society. He had a great life going on. And although our stories were similar or different, the emotions and the void that he was trying to fill since he was as little as first onset memories, remarkably similar, terrifyingly similar. And one of the things that led me to my substance use disorders was this sense of terminal uniqueness, I like to call it. Nobody understands me. Nobody feels like I feel. I can't talk to anybody. It doesn't. I don't know why I feel this way, but I'm constantly trying to prove myself to other people. You can put me in a room full of people and I can be this character that's super charismatic, but on the inside I'm just this shell. And I looked at him and I was like, holy cow, like maybe I'm not so unique, right? And the turning point is when he said, yeah. I said, well, like, what do you have? Are you bipolar? Are you depressed? Like, because throughout my childhood, well, I guess my adolescence and teen years, you know, I had seen doctors, I had seen psychologists, I'd seen therapists, and you know, bipolar, depression, anxiety disorders, these were all things that came up. And so as he's explaining this to me, I'm like, so, you know, what pill are you on? What's your diagnosis? And he goes, I'm an addict. And it was the first time that I was like, oh, maybe that's what I am too. And the fact that he had turned his life around and was living a life that he was comfortable with, confident in, successful by internal moral measures. He was happy. He was a good father. He was a good husband. I was like, well, it provided me so much hope that I wasn't alone, that there was a way through this, that somebody else had done it. I didn't have to invent the wheel on this because, again, I'd been to doctors. I'd done everything that you're supposed to do leading up to that, and nobody could really give me a full spectrum picture of what I was dealing with. So, fast forward a few years, I'm clean, I'm sober, my family life has returned, my wife has returned, my kids have returned, my financial responsibilities as a business owner had returned. And a series of events, it was right on the onset of COVID. I'm from a city of about 70,000 people in southern Alberta, so geographically we're a little different than you guys. Like there's literally not another town for 100 miles around us. We're very isolated in this little pocket, right? So within a population of 70,000 people, there's not more than 1 degree of separation from anybody. Everybody knows somebody that knows somebody, right? And early onset COVID, a series of, one of my good friends took his life as a result of, well, who knows what a result of, but again, by all measures of society, a successful guy. He was inheriting a multi-million-dollar company, generational wealth. You know, he had everything going for him, and it shocked the community. Why would he? And I mean, like, that's the family with like streets named after him, right, in towns, and you know, it was shocking to everybody. And I was quietly sitting there, going like, I get it, right? I get the demons that you're dealing with. I get it, and you know, maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have done that. And so the night of his funeral, all his friends had a party, right? Celebration of life. Let's all talk about the good times. Everybody got drunk. There was a bunch of coke. Everybody was partying. Let's talk about the good times. That night, another one of my best friends went home, coming down from coke, made the decision to take his life. That series repeated itself 13 times over the period of literally weeks. 13 husbands, sons, fathers, business owners took their lives. It got to the point, those of us who were left were scared to answer our phones because it was just a matter of who's next, right? That launched me into a course of action that started my path in nonprofits. I came from a government background within infrastructure. I owned a construction company. I owned several construction companies. Ended up working with the government with infrastructure and contract development. And I had the skill set, and I didn't know how to apply it to this world. And what I realized is you know, transferable skills exist amongst addicts too, right? There's, you know, you want to know a guy that knows how to hustle and knows business, talk to a drug dealer. Right? Like, he will redefine your strategic plan on a business plan pretty quickly and really effectively. And so I started a nonprofit, and that nonprofit was based on collecting stories of people to provide hope for people. My intent was to go out and find, I know my story, I knew my buddy's story. You know, we're both 6'2", heavily tattooed, bearded, oil field Alberta guys, right? We're the stereotypical cowboy boot wearing dudes. And I'm like, well, that's great if that's what you are and you can identify with my story, but what about the other 99% of the population? So we sought out to seek out as many people in recovery as we could to kind of gather stories. So, you know, I'm not the single mom who would go out and hustle and have 3 part-time jobs and come home and manage with 2 bottles of wine before bed. That's not my story, but I know that woman. And so I went out and systematically collected as many stories from as many diverse backgrounds as I could in order to show people that no matter who you are, you're not alone. And there's somebody that's battled this, and there's somebody that's gone through it. There's somebody that's come out the other side. And that gave birth to my first nonprofit that I founded, and became very successful. We kind of grew pretty rapidly and started putting together programming. We developed programming with school boards. We have recovery-oriented systems in schools. We have peer support in school. I don't like saying peer support in school because we're not peers. We're adults and they're kids, but we kind of massage that to make it work a little bit. Remand, we put together programs with remanded inmates for the prison system. City police, we work very closely with them. Many other organizations within the community. The food bank, we kind of just implemented our people into every pocket that we could to try to make sure that there was always a peer, because in the end, it took a system for me to get to where I am. It took doctors, it took psychologists, it took psychiatrists, it took all of these resources. But it was the peer that opened that door for me, that gave me that hope, that kind of helped me navigate that system. So that's what we tried to do. And I think I'm just rambling now, so thanks. Sorry.
Thank you. So we'd like to talk a little bit about community, and I can't think of anybody else better than Jennifer, to talk about the community that the Grand Ronde tribes have put together, and who they are and how that's translated into this work.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? I'm here to talk about a program called Great Circle Recovery and the Confederated Tribes' commitment to the opioid crisis. And I'll just tell you a little bit about that and then some of the approaches that we're taking to combat the opioid crisis. And that impacts the community and those folks who are unhoused, because we have quite a few folks who are unhoused that we serve. I had the chance to attend the Tribal National Opioid Summit a couple weeks ago, and it was really powerful. It was all the tribes coming together from the Northwest, just looking at the different approaches that there are to the opioid crisis. And Grand Ronde had a commitment to their tribal members, the community, and friends and family. They looked around and they saw that what was happening was not okay. People were continuing to overdose. And they realized we have to extend this outside of our community because it's impacting family members, community members, kind of a larger footprint. So they opened an opioid treatment program called Great Circle Recovery, which I helped build and operate currently. We're in Salem, and we're also in Portland. And the approach that's really important is holistic, comprehensive care. The moment that someone walks in to our program, they're enveloped in the community that comes from being part of the tribe. There's a mural on our wall of the Willamette Falls in the Portland Clinic, so it's one of the first things that folks see when they walk in. And in terms of an opioid treatment program, all opioid treatment programs offer medication, and that's really important. That's one of the pillars of a system of recovery that we need: rapid access, low barrier to medication, especially methadone. But what makes the tribe's perspective really unique is that ability to not only provide the low barrier rapid access to medication, but some of the additional supports and services that folks also need, from case management to housing resources to shower laundry. We have a shower laundry trailer on site that's part of our services and programming, because for our unhoused folks, sometimes that might be the only place where they can get a shower and they're just trying to survive. So really those small things that you can do along with helping them to get further along in their recovery are really important. So Grand Ronde has embraced that approach. And out on the campus in Grand Ronde, they've taken it to a continuum of care. There's housing, supportive housing, there's crisis housing. There's an entire campus of supportive services for tribal members that already existed and is being built out prior to the extension of the opioid treatment programs off of campus. But really, you know, what's important is rapid access, low barrier, and just that sense of community and being able to work with all of our community partners. And we welcome anybody. You don't have to be tribal to come there. We serve tribal members, but we welcome anybody. And what's most important is their collaborative approach to opioid treatment care in an OTP model. There's rules and regulations that make that kind of treatment in a box like this. But it's really wonderful to see how the tribe has kind of mapped out how to do those services for folks. But one of the things that I would also like to say is that it's really important to just get medication out there. And we did build Oregon's first mobile clinic, and we take that out to the reservation to help really bring that access to tribal members, and then we go to some other communities as well. But again, meeting people where they're at is one of the things that the tribe has really embraced. Also looking at culturally specific and supportive care. So making sure that all of our tribal members have access back to the tribe, to the services that are specifically there. So I am really grateful for their vision and commitment for the community, for Grand Ronde tribal members, and to the other folks that we're able to serve at Great Circle. I did hear at the National Opioid Summit, I heard a peer speak, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said that the people that are closest to the problem are furthest away from the solutions. And I think it's really important that we all think about who we're talking about, who is part of this problem, not only the folks that are using, but the folks that are involved in the criminal and all the other parts of it, because all of the people that are involved in the opioid crisis are closest to the solution. So,
Thank you. Also during the course of this morning, you're going to hear about recovery-oriented systems of care and recovery-oriented centers. They're buildings that have a variety of services. They're related, they're not the same, and so there's been interest in not only expanding upon the system of care that we have in this county, but also looking at a recovery-oriented treatment center. So I know Robert's going to talk about that a little bit, about buildings and infrastructure, and so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to go through sort of more of a systems process approach. You're starting a journey here. And I've learned, I helped set up Haven for Hope. I've helped about, hundreds of communities sort of start through this process in my stints at the White House. So this sort of series of bigger system level lessons I've learned on how to get to success, because there are many communities that are being very successful, and there are many communities that just either A, aren't doing anything, they sort of close their eyes, hope it will get better on its own, or what they do, they actually make things worse. I mean, there are a lot of communities out there that when you start to look at what they do, it doesn't work, or they try little gimmicks and it doesn't go. So I'm just going to sort of just click through some really quick lessons learned. First is, you absolutely have to develop a near universal agreement, and I say near because sometimes there will be outliers and you just can't you don't want to get a joint understanding that you water down to nothing. So sometimes there are people that won't agree to it. So I say near universal agreement on what success looks like. Because if you don't have that, it's going to get you to two different places. And I encourage you to think big, and I encourage you to think very precisely. If your success is, I want to get people into housing, full stop, that's it. That will get you to a different place than you say, we want to have people exit from homeless forever. We want people no longer to be dependent on subsidized housing. We want to have a lower addiction death rate, or we want people, higher market rent, whatever. It needs to be precise and it needs to be big, but what you pick and what you agree to is going to get you to two different places. If it's just I want to get a person off the street into housing, that gets you to a different place than I want self-sufficiency and people exiting homeless and not being subsidized housing anymore. And I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. Some communities, this is the right place to be. Other communities, this is the right place to be. But wherever you get to, you want to have an agreement, because I guarantee you, if you all have different places you're going, before you even start, you're going to go off. We need all these people that are diverse, coming from a lot of places, going to one precise point. Number two, absolute no silver bullets. For those of you who've ever read Peter Drucker, who was the management guru of the last century, who his first 50, 70 books were all about business management systems. But his last 6 or so books were about nonprofit management and why it was so important. Later in his life, he turned to nonprofit as really the most important. But how do you take those business learning things and bring it together? And by the end, and I was fortunate to go to the Peter Drucker at Claremont. It was renamed after we graduated. But the thing I picked up from him is you're going to have your brain and heart going at the same time. And most time when I go into homeless groups, either the heart's working and there's no brain, or there's brain and no heart. I'm way oversimplifying, but I'm being, serious. And his approach was, you want to have your heart and brain working at the same time. You want to have the passion, but we need sustainable systems that do it. And often the social workers, well, I don't want to have a system. And often the business people don't come with the heart. I mean, not everybody's that way. I'm obviously oversimplifying. But you need to say we appreciate both. We need the passion and systems. We need business approaches, and we need compassion and heart. And so you need both at the same time. And Peter Drucker would talk a lot about it's doing hundreds of small things right every day. And it is. So number 3 is, if you want to start getting real improvement, you need system level change, which we've talked a lot about, and it's an entire system. So even if you build a building or a micro campus or a mini campus or whatever, it still needs to be part of an overall system. And maybe a lot of the systems are embedded there, but I guarantee you not all will be. So you need law enforcement, for example. You need fire department. You need EMS. So you got to have systems level improvement. But the other is you need every single nonprofit agency and government agency to improve their deliverables. They need to move from outputs to outcomes, and they need aggravated improvement. So when you aggregate all the improvement of the nonprofit, the agencies, with the system improvement, you put them together, those are the cities that are very, very successful, and they're constantly improving. Homelessness, 4th observation is, to me, homelessness is complex, but it's not complicated. And there's a difference. And if you look at the dictionary, one is you need to analyze it and work the problem one step at a time, quickly. Don't analyze it. Don't form committees. Don't do 2-year research projects. Do 60-day, 90-day implementation. Get started. Get going. Just do it. Nike here. And so you have to get going and start going. But complicated sort of assumes I'm never going to solve this. I'm never going to address it. You sort of give up, or you just do gimmicks, try little things at the end. I think the best way to think of homeless is those mega rubber band balls, that are go. If you say, go pull the red rubber band, I guarantee you're not going to pull a red rubber band without breaking it. But if you say, disassemble that ball of rubber bands, you can do it. It takes some time, but you get started, it takes time. And you look at it and you go, what is the outside rubber band? Take that one off. Then you look at it, analyze it. What's the next one? And you do it. So you research, action, and then you can disassemble that rubber band ball pretty quickly if you do that. But if you sit there and say, I am only going to work on purple, or I'm only going to work on pink rubber bands. You end up breaking them and you don't disassemble it. That's the difference between complex and complicated. Other important thing is when you get in the world, and I found this a lot when I was in the White House and the homeless czar, is I'll go do a speech and the invitation will be, I want you to come talk about family and children homeless. And then you start doing that, and you're in an audience, and somebody asks a question about adult males, to your point. These are different. The federal government has 10 different definitions of homelessness. 5 from Department of Education, 5 from HUD. So whenever you're talking about homeless, make sure the whole room knows what type of homeless or what cohorts. Are we talking about all 10? Are we talking about 1? Whatever. Now, most of what our conversations yesterday were about were street-level homelessness. That's 1 of 10. That's not 10 of 10. It's 1 of 10. But you need to understand that. So if we're talking about street-level homelessness, the most comprehensive study out there, and I would encourage everybody to read it. It's a quick read, take you 20 minutes. It's from the California Policy Lab, which is a combination of UC Berkeley, UCLA, and it's a 64,000 in study. Most homeless studies are maybe 1,000. I've seen homeless studies that people change policy on 64 people, not randomly assigned, not double blind, but 64 health select, and then we change our policy on that. That's not research. That's not analytical decision making. But the 64,000 large in study on just street level homeless, it has other part of the study, but if you look at it, it simply says 3/4 of the people on the street have untreated mental illness, 3/4 of the people on the street have addiction. There's mostly overlap, there's some not overlap, but you have to understand that. And the study said self-report, we all know self-report underestimates. Self-reports say my untreated mental illness is a direct cause of my homelessness. Also another half say my substance use disorder is the cause of my homelessness. It's the largest study there is. That should be our driving force when you think about 1/10 of the homeless problem, street level, which is the problem in Portland. To be honest, that's the group that's where the challenge is. So if you understand it's untreated mental illness and substance use, you need a recovery system. You need everything that you've been talking about, you're driving. That's what you need. You don't, if we start with this is a housing problem and don't treat it, it will not work. It has to be housing and treatment together. It's not one or the other, it's together, and you have to have them together. So let's make sure as you start down this path, are we talking about homeless? Are we talking about family and children? Are we talking about the person that they used to call working poor, now it's workforce poor, or workforce near homeless? You know, make sure you know what you're talking about, because that will get you to different solutions. Each of these 10 cohorts have different root causes, which means your solution needs to be different. Just period. It's just common sense. So assuming we're staying with the homelessness as being the street level homelessness, that 1/10 there, you need to, I encourage you, if you want big improvement, in the poor panel, they've been hearing this all the time. If you want big improvement, you have to make big change. You will not get big improvement doing small change or gimmicks. And I'm a former elected mayor of San Antonio, Mayor Pro Tem of San Antonio, and the rap on elected, so I'm going to point at me, the rap on electeds is, I want to see how little I can put in, and I want this much improvement. It happens, all electeds, we're all wired that. How little can we do and get this much? And everybody says, I want this much, and you campaign on this is much, what much. And then you get in, and you're like, how little can I do? It's not going to happen. If you want big changes of outcomes, if you don't want to be what's happening to Portland, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, now Honolulu, now Philadelphia, you're going to have to make big changes, and you're going to have to do it different than what you're doing. If you just keep giving more money to the same systems doing the same thing, your problems are actually going to get exacerbated and bigger. You have to change how you do your money, and you have to think big about your money. It's both. It's not one or the other. You need both to do that. Let's be honest about it. Fentanyl is changing this thing. It is dramatically changing. Fentanyl is not 5% stronger, 10% stronger, 100% stronger. It is 5,000 to 10,000% more powerful than methadone and your other opioids on the street on a unit-to-unit basis. This is dramatically different. And so anything about homelessness, anything about addiction, if you don't like just face fentanyl straight up, you know, which a lot of people have a lot more clinical understanding on how to do that than I do. But if at a systems level you don't take fentanyl serious and understand that is different, you go. And I get in a lot of trouble saying this, but I see this over and over and over. And I've been saying it for about 10 years. If we provide housing with fentanyl and no treatment, it's a death sentence. And I've been saying it for about 10 years. You'll hear it in speech, and I got criticized a lot. And then this year, JAMA, I think it was JAMA, Medical Journal came out, and they looked at why is homeless death rate in most of the country doubled in 3 years. Had nothing to do with COVID. JAMA went in and assumed it was COVID deaths and such. They came out, they said they did not find one part of the increase had anything to do with COVID. It was 94% of the increase was death in SROs because they did not get treatment before they got housed, they didn't get treatment while they housed, and they didn't have post-treatment while they were being placed. And so if you just think of this as a housing issue and not a treatment issue, we're going to kill people. And we are. California's killing people. Double the death rate in under 3 years. And it's all about overdose inside of SROs. That's the whole game now. And so we have to think of holistic treatment, trauma-informed care treatment within an overall system, whether you be building a building or not, a little micro-campus. It has to be a system inside the campus and outside the campus. And you absolutely have to think big if you're going to want to do, if you want to make change. If you don't want to do it and you just want to do gimmicks, we're all wasting our time. You know, you shouldn't bring people like us in. It's a waste of time. And you're going to waste your money, and you're going to have a higher death rate and such. So I'll leave you with sort of the good news and then an axiom that Tom and I both use a lot. Haven for Hope, and it's just one model. There are many models out there, but there is hope. And that, you know, look at Pinellas County. Look at Fort Smith, Arkansas. Look at Southwest Arkansas. San Antonio, we have 91 housing placement that lasts sustained for a year, 91%. That's what we've been running for 13 years, not 13 months, 13 years. We have reduced overall homelessness in San Antonio, street level homeless, by 85%, sustained level. We have a lower death rate, and I wish it was zero, but we have a lower death rate relative to larger cities, any other measurement you want to use. And our addiction rate is because we assume that if you're on the street, we're going to start with the assumption of untreated mental illness and substance use. It's probably going to be one or both. And we're going to start with that because that's the big number. Are we going to miss a few people? There are going to be a few people that come in and I don't have untreated, I don't have this, I just need a house. And that's about 8-9% in San Antonio. There's a group like that. You get them off that track, go take care of them, do what they need. But it has to be customized to that individual, and you have to have a robust system. And I'll leave you at that, and you just handed this out here. This is so striking. 50th in access to treatment in the country. Think about that. And the axiom, before I even saw this, the axiom that Tom and I sort of use in different ways, and I try to, my whole philosophy gets down to this 2 sentences. Our current policies in America make it easy to get high and hard to get treatment. That's our whole policy now. That's the federal policy. That's the harm reduction policy. Let's just throw it out in there. Tom and I and others have a real different view of that. We think we should be making it easy to get treatment and hard to get high. And if you say, I want to make it easy to get treated and hard to get high, that's going to design you a different system than a safe consumption site in San Francisco that says, we're going to make it easy to get high, hard to get treatment. In fact, we're going to take our treatment money out in order to fund the safe consumption site, which I thought when I heard that was the nuttiest thing I have ever heard in my life. I mean, it wasn't just we're going to change our thing. We're going to take the money out of treatment and put it over here to help that site. And if you do that, you're not going to move the ball. You're going to death rate. I mean, you know, Sheldon's probably going to talk about the increased death rate in some of the studies they've seen in Canada. So takeaway, if you want big change, make some really big changes, and you can be successful. Many places are. If you just want to do gimmicks, it's not going to work. You want to do small stuff, it's not going to work. If you want to do small stuff with the hope of big things happening, it won't work. You got to think big.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. I do have some documents that the panelists have provided us, and rather than killing a forest, I'm going to be sending them to you electronically, so you'll be able to read them at your leisure. And I know that Alberta's done some great things, and you know, Sheldon, I saved the best for last, right? And so, if you could talk about your work and the work in Alberta, and just let folks know what you're thinking.
Hey everyone, I'm Sheldon. I'm down from Alberta with Rick. I am also a person in recovery. I had built what would have looked like a pretty good life from the outside. I ran a recruitment business for several years at the end of my kind of career, I suppose, before addiction took over. I ended up the last couple years of my active addiction. It was many years of drinking and doing cocaine, and then it turned to meth and fentanyl, and losing multiple homes, the relationships, the dignity and the shame that came with that. And I kind of got to a point where I had no other choice. It was going to be, move to live on the street or go to treatment, and I chose to go to treatment. And that was Christmas holidays of 2015. I took myself to detox. And went to treatment after that. And kind of around that time, I had made the decision that I'm going to try to refocus my life to be of service. Somewhat selfish in a way, because I didn't have a life to go back to in my business career. I didn't have it just all fell apart. But more so just because I had a desire to really try to bring about change in the world to help people that were in the same situation as myself. So I very strategically went about working frontline jobs. I worked at a shelter, a halfway house, I did street outreach, et cetera. The kind of list goes on. I haven't mentioned this to the panel. I kind of told a bit of this yesterday, but I didn't tell what really happened. 19 months into abstinence based recovery, I relapsed. And look, I've been arrested on a cocaine charge. I've been in the back of multiple police vehicles. I've been formed under Mental Health Act in meth-induced psychosis. I have been released from hospital. In one instance, my first memory being picking up the meth pipe again. I have been given a taxi chit to go to detox and not being accepted once I got there, and spinning around this in the cycle. And after 50 days of using meth, kind of managed to pull myself back and get back on track. So it's been a number of years now. And somewhere in there, I decided I'm going to get involved in politics. And so I managed to kind of, I'm lucky and fortunate enough to have worked for the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction in Alberta, and it was 2 ministers while I was there. In Alberta, we are building a recovery-oriented system of care. So, I hear people struggling to figure that out, so I'm going to help you with this. Break it in 2 pieces. Recovery-oriented, that's the goal, and system of care. If you look at it like that, we're trying to build a system of care. So I told this story yesterday. Last year, I had the opportunity to visit Tom in San Francisco. We've been to Seattle, I've been to downtown Vancouver, obviously. But one of the first people we saw, the guy's leg was rotting, and he was obviously not in good shape. And, how are we leaving people on the street? With the argument being that this person has the right to use drugs and a right to bodily autonomy. I think differently. But actually, I don't. I do think people have a right to do as they wish, as long as they're not harming others. But what I can tell you from my own experience of being in addiction is that at a certain point in the addiction, we lose the capacity to think and act for ourselves. And when a person is on the street in that shape, they have lost the capacity to think and act for themselves. So I look at it like this. The recovery-oriented part of system of care is that we take a person and Tom was one of these people living on the streets. I have a video on Twitter of a little interview with Tom speaking in front of the doorway where he used to sleep, right? So we take a person that's on the street, and how do we get them to a point where, they're reintegrated with their family and they're walking their kids to school? And so some people might say that, we just need to put them in housing and manage their situation. There are 100% people like that. But I would argue, look, I've got a friend that ended up in a coma for 3 months and now is in long-term recovery and goes into schools and speaks about the dangers of gang and drug life. Recovery is possible for everyone, and therefore recovery needs to be the goal. So that's the thinking that we need to bring forward. So I don't know if anybody knows much about Portugal, but Alberta is modeling roughly what Portugal did. They took many years to implement a system, but their drug deaths went down and people got well, is essentially the moral of the story. And people misconstrue what happened in Portugal. Portugal decriminalized drugs in 2001. And then that gets misconstrued as legalization and the right to use drugs and that sort of thing. It never was what it was. They built a system with infrastructure first, and they used decriminalization as a way to move forward with administrative sanctions instead of criminal sanctions against individuals. So you would be given, if you're caught with drugs on the street, you'd be given a summons to appear before a dissuasion commission, who would decide if you do an assessment for addiction, or if you have a propensity or factors in life that might lead you to addiction. If you were caught with a larger quantity of drugs, you're still going to jail. Public drug use is not acceptable. So while they did take a very, let's reduce the stigma and let's treat this as a healthcare issue, they used this as a way to divert people into the treatment and recovery system, and it worked. So we're doing much of that in Alberta. I just encourage you to Google some of the work that's happening in Alberta. But there's other provinces in Alberta implementing, something similar. So I'm going to hone in on one piece of this because everybody here has kind of said a lot of what's important to say. But that person that's on the street that's struggling, what do we do? So in Alberta, Alberta has brought forward what's called the Compassionate Intervention Act. And it's based on, and I think Dr. Mendenhall talked about this, a law out of Massachusetts. So there is precedence in the United States, and that precedence is that we're going to mandate treatment in some situations. A police officer or a parent can apply to the courts to have a person apprehended if they are deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. So it's very controversial for a lot of people, but I would say this. Interestingly, one of the largest groups in favor of intervention like that is people in recovery, because we had wished that when we were at our worst, somebody had done something. And I would say, if you talk to the parent or if you think about the many people who've died, and we should ask ourselves a question: should we have let nature take its course like it did, or should we have intervened earlier? We need to start intervening. So we build these systems. Like we went last night and visited the area that is being looked at by the commissioners to build this kind of program. But how are people going to get there? If there's a bed available, what are we going to do? Are we going to literally walk around downtown Portland or here in Clackamas County and look at a person on the street that's rotting and not do anything? What are we doing as a society? I think we have an obligation to get these people off the streets and into some sort of care. Not everyone is going to go on to live the perfect life, but we need to give people a fighting chance. I'm just going to leave it there and say, I'm grateful to be here and grateful that everyone's taken the time to come and hear what we have to say.
Thank you to everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you. So before we go on break, what I would ask you is, have you had enough? Is it enough to change? Have you had enough of either living through this crisis, having family and friends in this crisis, having community members in this crisis, having your community in crisis? And if you've had enough, do you want to make some changes to move things forward? That's really where we want to have this conversation. We don't want to have a theoretical conversation. We want to really talk turkey and get things moving, because I think from all of your lenses, from all the places you stand, you've all had enough. And so really that's what we're hoping this next conversation will be. We've got a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and the panelists will also be at the tables, and we'll be having some good conversations. So thank you. out to the group from your tables. And we were going to have this, the chair go first, and if you could select somebody who's going to do the report out, then we're going to have the panelists come up and talk about their reflections on the past couple of days. So we'll start with the chair.
Thank you. I'm reading off of my notes because whatever. The first thing we might want to do is commission a study to analyze our gaps. And the data will inform us on our needs, our gaps, the positive things we already own, and the available resources as far as money and community support and our staff support and the programs we already have in the county. Secondly, in Clackamas County, when we develop this, we know that a lot of different support systems are going to have to come on board. And we already have something operating, and that's the Clackamas Women's Center and the Justice Center in Clackamas County, where we have the police, where we have many, many nonprofits aiding and supporting. And so that may be a microcosm, but that system already works well. So when we locate a facility, which we may have, that's no secret, there shouldn't be a secret in here, the board is already considering something. And then that Dr. Marbut went out and looked at it and was blown away by it. I'll just say that. So at least establishing one site is on the table. So, and then selling it to the community, we can say we've already done something like this, although it's not a residential place. We can do that. I think that's important to do that. Clackamas County centered eligibility. And you can check on that easy. Did you attend high school here? Do you have family? Do you have a utility bill? They may be in transient stage. But we probably want to limit it to Clackamas County people first and not be flooded by folks coming in from Portland. And I think we all can probably agree with that. Airports are a good model for what we want to do here. And they have, your PIC, and then you have your different areas of effectiveness to run an airport. And I didn't know that. I mean, I'm learning so much here. I never thought of using the airport as a model to make something like this run. Also, it's cheaper to do one large site than it is several other sites, smaller sites. That was news to me too. The turnaround time for our residents who go in is probably 1 year. We need to be able to hold them accountable. The more community people we involve in this, the better. And that because our businesses, our neighbors, our schools, our police, our fire, churches, as much buy-in as we can get in on this in the beginning will be really helpful. Don't open the entire campus in one day. Have soft openings where we do, 20 people maybe. The facility would probably house a lot more, but we could open one day to see how that runs and have several soft openings over time before we have the big grand opening, because we don't want to fail. We are trying to mitigate any problems we might have with that going forward. We're coining a term here, and it's called the Clackamas Way. We're going to do this the Clackamas way. And I think that is really important as we go forward. Naming of the facility will be important. We do not want to use terms like shelter, drug rehab, mental health rehab. We need to find a nice fuzzy name that's unique to Clackamas County. And I'm going to stop, Cindy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Who's going to speak here? Okay.
Are we talking to all 4 questions or just the first for right now? Okay. Okay. All right. Summary. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to look at my notes. So a lot of what we discussed early on was just kind of the need for an opportunity for organizations across all the different sectors to share information in a better and more meaningful way. So a potential I'm looking at the first question. So a potential resource that Dr. Andrew talked about is HealthShare is working to develop, I guess, claims data that would tell us a little bit more about how people are moving through the systems and the need for us to really utilize that data and have our different providers using one system for patient records so that organizations can better communicate with one another and there can be more alignment. And Sarah from 4D shared that that is also a big barrier for them in their services is when someone comes in and enters the system. Oftentimes all of that documentation doesn't make it to the next provider, so people are having to start all over again when they have a person enter services. What's that? And the outreach teams. Yeah. And these are people who are often very hard to find because they are usually experiencing houselessness as well. What's that? Yeah, bringing in the CCO, the coordinated care system, like HealthShare, into all of the solutions so that there can be better alignment and also leverage resources at that level as well. We talked about bringing services together under one roof, and that's something that Dan is working on right now. Dan with the Abernethy Center, and having a hub and spoke model, not smoke, sorry. So the hub would be a center for all of the services to be located, and the spokes would be like mobile vans that can go out to the rural communities and provide really essential services and use that as a way to outreach to those communities because they're often really underserved and very hesitant to come into like an urban center for services as well. So I think those were a lot of the key themes. Is there anything that you all would like to share that we discussed?
I think that, oh, do I have to use that? Yeah. So I think, and I wish that he didn't have to leave, so Dr. Andrew Mendenhall mentioned too, was that they're doing almost like a census, a data to be able to analyze just how many people that we have in the community that need services, so that we can actually have a total number of people, so that we have a better idea of what this needs to look like. If you're building out a program, you have to know who you're building it out for and how many you're building it out for, so you know how many detox beds you need. And that's where Sarah was mentioning there's a breakdown where you can't get into recovery unless you detox. Well, a drug addict is not going to detox themselves. It's not possible in many instances. So there's that entire paradigm of care from start to finish, and then that interim housing, and then the permanent housing, and getting them back on their track to a normal life. But the data itself, the data gathering needs to take place first so that we actually understand the whole picture. And I thought that was really important to note, so thank you.
Yeah. See, I said I didn't want to talk, and then I'm like, I just really want to press in the need for treatment centers and detox centers and sober living, and so when people are wanting the help, because we do, and I'm not, might go against my table, and I think data is super important, but I don't think we should wait till we collect all the data before we start implementing these things. We need to start doing it now and finding like a restorative justice model somewhere in between this super liberal and letting people do drugs to making everything super law and order. And like right now, this is our moment in time to grab that and be like, how can we like grab people and get them the help they need when they need it? So I just want to really advocate, and 4D want to advocate for adolescent care also, and and maybe making it available to organizations that they can get grant money to build out capital to provide these things for them, and then the government would not have to continue to give money for that. So it's the build up capital, and then we could bill out. But we're just really, as a person that runs the outreach team currently, we see a lot of people wanting help, but there's not enough help out there, especially in Clackamas County, and also not to pick on them because I love you guys, and that some of the services are really siloed. So we have like the Clackamas County plan, and then we have the Washington County plan, and then we have the Multnomah County plan, and like a lot of us are tri-county organizations, and it would be good if we had something that was more integrated.
Thank you. Okay, we only have a certain amount of time.
Cindy knows me. She's like, don't give Commissioner West the mic. We piggybacked on some of what you guys all have already talked about. We talked specifically about peer support and the quality of peer support. So is there training? Is there accountability? Is it clinically supervised? Is the peer support actually helping? Or are they just getting high with their peer? Eventually, are they relapsing? Is there a stability piece to it that allows it to be stable? And so how do we expand that aspect that it speaks to somebody in a relational way that helps them move forward, and having a system around that? We talked a lot about workforce issues. Under Sheriff Ms. Morrison talked about how they had a wonderful program they were ready to hire for. They could not find a clinician, so that job is unfilled. We have all talked about that throughout Oregon. Chair Smith has worked with the governor directly and Health and Human Services to talk about the pay equity issues that came about with that, where it really inhibited us from actually paying living wage jobs to people and competitive wages to make people get paid their worth so they'll do good work for us in this space. So we talked about the behavioral space. Commissioner Schrader has worked closely with that, but that continues to be an issue. We can build out a recovery center, which I think we will, and I think it's going to be epic and amazing, and it's going to be what we need here. We have the navigation center working with Dan Fowler. We're doing big and epic things in Clackamas County, but we really do need to be able to staff it. So that is a major state federal issue that I know we're all facing. One of the big pain points is open air drug usage throughout the metro area. We see it throughout the Tri-County area and up and down the Willamette Valley from Medford all the way up, really to British Columbia. So allowing people to openly use and have no hope beyond that, and we just sit there and watch them do it, is unacceptable. So that's a real pain point, that not just for the addict, but also for the community and health community as a whole. We talked about the disjointed approach. One of the big pain points also that Clackamas County needs to do better, and it was an issue, it sounds like, with the Grand Ronde Tribe, maybe other organizations, is the ability not to take that data that's important so we know what we're doing, but we can't talk to each other because EMR silos people off. Most places use Epic within the Portland area. The hospital systems use Epic, but we're having issues with being able to know who you're dealing with and what their file looks like because of some misalignment between systems, some misuse of legal interpretation. But we have to be able to work together, maybe even come together for a summit that allows us to provide medical information sharing. So when someone comes into the jail system, they're not blinded to in the morning, but they know this person maybe has a diagnosis and they may have these specific needs, and we're providing patient-centered care at the point that we have access to them immediately. So the moment we intersect within any system of care, that's an access point, but we can't do that when we're siloed with really bad information, with information within the medical system that doesn't talk to each other. Housing needs to know what component it ties to with someone's addiction or mental health issues in care. And so we have work to do that here in the county, and maybe we can work together as a region to figure out how we can get grants, funding necessary so we have Epic available. That's what we need to be using, is that system throughout as we address this issue. Traumatizing care is a pain point where someone feels like a criminal, or they feel like they're being stigmatized, or they go into a situation where they're not getting care, but they're surrounded in a situation that's sterile, non-human, that's lonely, that's scary, and is actually a good access. And any needs? We talked about the needs. Wait. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. So as a healthcare provider, I've cared for the population on the nursing bed when I hope my patient in psychosis that's drug induced doesn't end up in the ceiling that night, and I'm alone, and they're here in the emergency room every other night. Sometimes they come with open wounds, maggots in their in those wounds, and they cannot advocate for themselves any longer, and I'm stuck with them with no resources in the emergency department. That's not working. Our method to treat fentanyl is outdated. I told the table we might as well be bloodletting. We have not modernized how we care for this population. here's just a bold example. We did just get 16 new beds in East Portland, right? We want stabilization and detox. That stay is 4 to 6 days. Did you know that to actually get somebody stabilized off fentanyl is a minimum of 21 days? We have no resource to actually do that. Fentanyl has changed the game, and we are still using antiquated systems and methods within healthcare to treat that. And so we have to be honest about what we're not doing and where those gaps are within care, because we can't keep using the same old systems to fix problems that are persistent. It's not working. So, yeah.
I just want to add in your opinion too, that people, like a lot of our detoxes are for people that are getting off fentanyl or opiates. And so there's this lack of care for people getting off of meth because they don't need medical stability, but most of the time they need mental health stability before they can even get into a detox.
I agree with that, and meth did change the game and really had to put pressures on the healthcare system with just meth. But then fentanyl was like, we're gonna raise you and up you in a way that none of us were really ready for. So we have to be honest about what systems we put in place within stabilizing detox and then transitioning somebody directly into some type of temporary supportive housing with services around that. But we have to really look at the healthcare system within our county and within the region and making sure it's evidence-based in its approach. And what we were looking at yesterday is outdated already. And I think that's it. I probably, Cindy's about to take the mic from me. I can feel the hook coming. I feel you on the back of my neck right now, Cindy. I feel you about to grab the mic. I think I covered it. Yeah, and I think that we do need big resources, big bold vision, and I think that's why we're all here. So thank you guys.
Thank you. One thing I just wanted to say really quickly, that this week, actually today and tomorrow, we are finalizing the closing of purchase of a 40,000 square foot mental health and addictions treatment center. So it's happening now. I don't know. No, I don't have. Yeah. It's on Lake Road. It's on Lake Road, Southeast Lake Road or Lake Road Southeast. No, it's actually it's a Milwaukee address, but it's unincorporated Portland. We had to demolish the 2 clinics that were on this site because of the courthouse. And so we've had folks temporarily here, and so we've been working really hard to buy a building that we can put the treatment in, and it's going to be expanded treatment. It's 40,000 square feet, so we're very excited about it. So, and Chair Smith has actually signed the closing papers as we speak. So thank you. Yes. This table.
You can read my writing.
Oh, yeah, I can. Okay, so on barriers and points of pain, we have a problem with limited access to treatment in the region. We have no unified plan between the state, the county, and our cities and metro. We have conflict in our ideas on how to approach the future. We have the problem of Measure 110. We have the lack of ability to intervene, and we cannot, there's no more carrot, okay? Yeah, just the stick. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. We have the problem of unabated drug trafficking, which is a problem that goes back to the federal level. That's their responsibility to control the border, control access to the cartels that are moving these drugs into our region. We have too high of a bar for civil commitment for people who are suffering from mental health issues. We have, like was mentioned before, we have siloed systems. One hand's not talking to the other. We have workforce issues in our hospitals, our mental health treatment. We're critically short on trained personnel in those areas. We have limited alternative, culturally specific services. Right, everything's like one color, okay? And we have the problem of lack of affordable housing, both for keeping people out of homelessness and into the potential for becoming addicted. And we also have the problem of just overall affordability and lack of housing. So that's what we have on barriers.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. I'll try to keep this shorter because a lot of the themes have already been mentioned. We, particularly the ones Commissioner West went over, but for connecting local dots, again, just the cross system work, getting different systems to talk with one another, de-siloing the approach. I do think we're doing a okay job in Clackamas County, but we can definitely do better. We need more access points to get people to treatment. When you look at like houseless community, justice, youth, they all sort of need their own approach. It's not a one size fits all. We need more education about what resources exist so that we know where to send people. Let's see. We talked about 4 pillars that are used in Alberta. Sheldon mentioned these, and we use them here too, but prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. So within all of those different levels of care, we need separate approaches. A couple of our barriers or pain points were mentioned around workforce, especially for peer support, paying people fair living wages. Peers are a critical resource, particularly we mentioned in the school for, connecting with at-risk youth. That's something that we need to think about integrating more. Stigma is also a pain point. And then honoring compassion fatigue with our first responders and just the larger community and business owners. So how to balance that, we didn't really talk about solutions, but it was mentioned. No, I'll just scroll down to the needs. So addressing across the continuum care, recovery access. Alberta is a model that was mentioned, which is like sort of a universal place to send people. Everyone knows to go there to receive care. Known treatment, more treatment. A connected system or a repository of patient information. I think Commissioner West explained that really well too. So if someone enters the system, providers can get in and access the record with their permission across the system. Upstream prevention, and then again, just workforce and reducing stigma. Oh, care coordination. Getting everyone talking. And and funding. Lots of needs. Anything else I forgot?
Early in our conversation, we were talking about youth, high school, and all the drug programs. And when I went to high school, about education and so forth, and we didn't say this directly, but what I heard earlier on the panel is those that are closest to the problem are farthest from the solution. And I think those individual specialties keep you close to the problem. And all to say that what also came up here indirectly was not all homeless people are addicts, and not all addicts are homeless. In fact, back to the kid story and back to the families, far more people that are not homeless that have addiction issues. I think we have to know our audience in order to solve the problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Couple of things. One, I forgot to thank Dylan and Rich for all the work and setting everything up, so thank you very much. But one important piece I want to mention is that Clackamas County has an incredible number of services today. Do we have enough? No. Do we have everything we need? No. But I really, for those folks who haven't been engaged that much with services, I don't want people leaving this room thinking there's nothing in Clackamas County, because there's been a lot of work going on. Clackamas has been first in a lot of areas. We were one of the first to actually hire a peer on staff and contract with peer delivered services. We were the first county to actually put crisis workers in with the sheriff's office. So there's been a lot of work, and I just don't want people who aren't familiar with it to leave thinking, oh my God, this is like there's nothing going on. There's a lot going on. We need to do more. We need to connect the dots. We need to connect that system, the treatment and the housing, all those pieces. But you've got really dedicated people. And the key, quite honestly, is it's not just a Clackamas County government issue. It's everyone's issue. It's everyone coming together in the community to really broaden out the leadership so that we have 4 mayors here. I'm thrilled that we have 4 mayors here. We've got EMS, we've got developers here, we've got the sheriff's office, great group of people, and we want everyone to be, excuse me, coming to the table even after today. So with that, I would like the panelists to come up. Panelists, you're Robert, you're our panelist, and give your final thoughts on what you've heard, anything that you want to leave us with. We are going to be meeting again in a couple of weeks with the panelists, and we will come out with a set of recommendations, but I just wanted to give them a chance to say a few words. You can sit down or stand up. What would you like to do? You went for last, you go first.
Sure. I think a lot has been said. I think it's amazing that one of the things that stood out yesterday, that there were people from clearly maybe different political leanings. There were people from public health. There were people from addiction services all coming together to focus on one thing, and that's people who are struggling. Where I'm from, it's very polarizing, and just to be in the same room with different people, putting those differences aside, that's the only way we're going to get anywhere. So I think what's happening here is amazing. I just want to say thank you to all the commissioners. A special thank you to Cindy, who's been working with us for a while here, and I appreciate everything that's happening here.
I was going to say almost exact same thing. It's so exciting how diverse this group is and such. And as you go through this journey, because it will be a journey, it's okay to have differences, and that actually makes you stronger, and that's very okay. And you want to have honesty to be able to do it, to have that conversation, but don't get it polarizing. And that the saddest places in this country are where things have gotten so polarized that until you fix that, you're not going to be able to fix the problem. But you all are well on your way, and it's just so exciting to just see just the energy of the last 2 days.
Everything they said.
You hear the term a lot, you can't recover if you're dead, right? And so we put all that focus on keeping people alive, right? But then we find out after we keep them alive that there's nowhere for them to recover. So they just go back into that washing machine again of using and then getting revived and using and getting revived. And did you know that when you overdose and you're not breathing for 3 to 4 minutes, that's hypoxia? Did you know that? I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I know enough to know that every time you get brought back from OD, you get brain damage. And I know people on the street that have had their ODs reversed 140 times in San Francisco. So I'm just telling you, like, this is what's happening in Portland, and it spills over into this county, etc. So, you can't recover if you're dead. It's true. But if we're not providing any space for them to recover, then what's the point? Like, it's not what's the point, but what are we doing, right? I get the point. We're saving lives. But if right afterwards they wake up, they're in precipitated withdrawal after you've given them Narcan and you have to use it again right away. It's literally a washing machine, a cycle that you get stuck in on the street, and we can't intervene because we made all these reforms that were well-intentioned with no infrastructure in place, which is why we have to have this meeting today, right? To talk about that infrastructure in those meetings. So I just encourage all of you to just think about that. How we got here is important so that we can learn from it, right, as we try to start building out these recovery systems of care. And I'm just really grateful to Cindy and to everyone here for actually coming here today and listening to us. Like Robert was saying, there's political, it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. This is a humanitarian crisis. Overdose and drugs and homelessness affects red states, blue states, Democrats, Republicans. We have to put our ideology aside for a hot minute and go out there and do more than just save lives. We have to do our best to give people an opportunity to transform their lives so that people like me, who 5 years ago was sleeping in a doorway in the Tenderloin on the street, which is true, can stand up in front of you today and talk about real solutions to recovery. Because those of us with lived experience, we have those solutions, and we should be listened to and help the doctors and help the politicians design the policy because we were there and we know how to get out. Thank you.
So while we're continuing to build the system and get everything where it needs to be, I'm going to keep continuing working on one life at a time. Opioid treatment programs, access to medication, this is one part of the solution right now. Getting Narcan to folks, making sure they can get in, getting access to medication, low barrier, wraparound services, one person at a time right now while we continue to build things out. And I thank everybody for just having this conversation and being willing to think about the changes that need to be made to the bigger system.
Thank you to our panelists. I really so appreciate you taking the time and spending and really, this is probably the best part, talking with real people about what's going on and boots on the ground. And so thank you for your expertise and your experience and your time. And I'm not done with you yet because we will have some more phone calls. Thank all of you for coming. I will be sending out an email to you because I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've learned and anything that you didn't get a chance to say or anything you want to emphasize. And if you want to be part of the solution going forward. So, we usually go with the quote unquote usual suspects, and we want to expand that pool to include as many people as possible. So give yourself a round of applause and thank you for being here.